Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and welcome to today's session. How are you doing? I pray that all is well with you and your families at this time. So today we're continuing with the Bhagavad Gita flow. And as we're studying Arjuna's situation, for the past 3 days we've been discussing some practical application which was needed to apply the philosophy. And we discussed the first pillar of devotional strength, that of prayer and hopefulness through the process of chanting. So how is your chanting going? Have you given the mind the sweet? So try it and see. If you don't try it, how will you know if it works or not? So try it and see the difference in your chanting. So today we're moving on with the flow of the Gita. So Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse number 16. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubayorapi drustontas, tvanayas tattvadarshibhi. Translation: those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent material body there is no endurance. Yes. So this is the yin-yang of spirituality. That many people feel that spirituality, spiritual science is just a subjective thing. People are superimposing some thoughts and beliefs to help people cope as a coping mechanism with life. This is not so. Bhagavad Gita is saying, and this verse is saying, that these are people who study truth. Tattvadarshi means one who studies truth. So he's looking at it objectively. He's looking outside that matter and he's looking within himself, spirit. So he's trying to understand what is the mechanism that makes both work. So this is the yin-yang of spirituality, studying matter and spirit, two totally opposite aspects of reality. And if you're going to know reality, if you're going to know life as the dhira, then you're going to have to know both. You're going to have to study both. So this is the first instruction Krishna is giving Arjuna. That did you study both? You've studied only matter, and that you've studied traditional matter. You studied culture, society, people. If you're going to discuss like a pandit, then let's get right down to it. What is the essential composition of these substances? What is the essential nature of these things? Let's start there, because from that everything else develops, grows, dwindles, and becomes manifest in the material form as body. Actually, according to Vedic study, the human being has a full cycle of life at 84 years old. When he reaches 84, it's a full cycle of human life. Any more than that is borrowed time. Good borrowed time. It's good borrowed time. So any more than 84 is borrowed time. Any less than that is still opportunity for development. So time is the governing agent in this material world. And we see that one's lifespan is by time, but the quality of one's life is by consciousness, by dhira. And this is the mechanism Krishna uses to control this world. That's why he says in the 11th chapter, Kalosmi lokadris pravisyate, that me in the form of time, I destroy everything in creation. So when we see destruction happening, we can also see this is the time factor. This is another aspect of Krishna. So we want to add more things in reality that we can relate to within the human experience that is Krishna directly. So yesterday we were discussing the different aspects of Krishna, the Mahaprasad, the Mahawater, the association, Krishna's darshan, and now we're seeing time. Time is also an aspect of Krishna. So when we're seeing time acting, we can see it everywhere. One day we see a green leaf, the next day it's a dry leaf. One day it's a green fruit, the next day it's a ripe fruit. That means time has acted. This is the big difference, that when you study as a Tattvadarshi, then you can see the fallibility of all the theories they have in science. And Prabhupada, then you can see the fallibility of all the theories that they have in science, because they've established these theories without the understanding of God. That's all Prabhupada said. Science is fantastic, but you have not included God in it because you have restricted science only to empiric evidential study. And by doing that, we've completely negated the study of the soul. And this is why the Tattvadarshi has a much more complete education system. He has a much more complete understanding because he's studying the nature of both. And proof of this is the very first principle that created physics. That was the apple fell from the tree. You remember that? So Prabhupada was saying, why did the apple fall from the tree? And science is giving it because of gravity. But Prabhupada said, if it was gravity, there were other apples on the tree. Why didn't the other apples fall? How's that logic? There are other apples there. Why didn't those apples fall? So it's not because of gravity, it's because of time. Wow, that is phenomenal, isn't it? It's because of time that this one apple fell, that the other apples were not ripened yet. That means the time factor had not fully developed. Therefore, Mr. Newton, when the apple fell on your head, it wasn't due to gravity, it was due to time. So Sankhya is a whole system of study that the Tattvadarshis go through. And we have this in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in great detail, studying each elemental nature of reality. In total, 26 elements are given. So this is very profound, very deep. So this is the nature of Vedic study. So the translation goes on. And of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. So this is what we actually hankering for. We want a situation where there's no change, right? We want something that's stable. We want a stable platform, and we're trying to create a stable platform on unstable foundation. The foundation of the material world, did we study it properly? It's not permanent. So if you build a structure on an unpermanent foundation, you're heading for disaster. So this is what Krishna is saying. You haven't studied the nature of both. You've only studied the material nature. You haven't understood. As Dhira, you should build your foundation on the spiritual platform. That doesn't change. That's permanent. So he goes on. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. So this is Dhira. This is the one who studies the nature of both. Studies the nature of matter, studies the nature of spirit. Remember the definition that was given. That Dhira means one who studies the soul, the super soul, nature, matter and spirit. This is the definition Prabhupada gave us in the previous verses. So it's a complete study of reality. If you only study reality from matter, you're only going to get a material reality. But we see there's something within us. There's something that lingers within the body that's non-material. And Krishna is slowly bringing Arjuna to his awareness of this element. What is it that is within the body that's not material? That he'll discuss in tomorrow's verse. Let's see what he says further. So let's see what Prabhupada says in the purport. There is no endurance of the changing body, that the body is changing every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern medical science, and thus growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. So you see towards the end here Prabhupada says despite changes of the mind as well. Have you studied the mind, Arjuna? So you haven't studied matter, you haven't studied the mind. Whose school you went to? Did you go to school or you went past the school? You're speaking like big Panditji here. You haven't studied matter and you haven't even studied the mind, and you want to argue with me? So by bringing in the mind factor, Prabhupada also brings in our identity. Because our personality, our identity is created within the mind. It's the software of the body. So if the personality and the identity is based on the mind, and the mind is based on material experience, then you're going to have a very unstable platform. So indirectly he's telling Arjuna there's a deeper level There's a deeper element within you, Arjun. There's a deeper level to you. If you build on that foundation, it's stable. All these other foundations are not. And therefore you're experiencing anxiety, suffering, mental distress. All these things are happening to you because you're only assessing from the material platform. And it's including the mind. So it's a chastisement. Krishna is saying, don't even assess from your mind, because you're expecting the mind, which is using imperfect senses, to give you perfect knowledge. That's not a good system of assessment. So Krishna is saying, become a seer, become a sage, become a seer, because a sage is assessing matter and spirit, and he's trying to find out who is controlling both. This is a seer. This is a seer. So the highest level of education that a human being can experience is that of a sage, of a seer. So Prabhupada goes on in the purport. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of seers of the truth. So Prabhupada is saying, don't only think because we are speaking Bhagavad Gita, it's from the Aryan culture, we the only ones who know this. No, anybody who is searched out, anybody who is a seer of the truth, a Tattvadarshi, in all religious traditions, you find these men. They are indeed great men. And the fact that you are watching this video right now, which means you fall into that category. You are a seer of the truth. You are trying to find and establish the truth. So in every religious tradition, you find these great seers of the truth. So it's not restricted to a teaching or a religious tradition. It's a way of life. It's a lifestyle. It's the dhira. So it's not a matter of what tradition you're following. Do you know the truth? Is your religious tradition teaching you the truth about life? Or are you just caught up in the ritual, tradition, culture of the religious teaching, and you haven't even tapped the aspect of the soul yet, genuinely? So this is the reality check. If you want the truth about life, if you want to understand life, you have to be dhira. You have to assess both matter and spirit. So whether your tradition teaches you impersonalism or whether your tradition teaches you personalism, both is established on the spiritual foundation. So where are you lingering? You're not even there yet. So how do you claim to be educated, Arjun? So this is really a slap in his face, because he's saying what you thought is religion, what you thought you know, you can't apply to life. You can only apply it to culture, religiosity and tradition. That is the gamut of your religious understanding. But now when it comes to practical life, you've broken down, you're distraught. So what have you learned, Arjun? You actually didn't learn anything, because life is going to happen to you. And when it's going to happen to you, you're going to need this level of understanding to come through it. Otherwise, what you think is religion, what you think is spirituality is useless to you right now. So Prabhupada goes on. In the Vishnu Purana 2.12.38, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all had self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyoti Mishya Vishnur Bhuvanani Vishnuhu. So we see Prabhupada is also bringing up the point here. These planets there are self-illuminated. So we know the spiritual dimension, the substance there is consciousness. So consciousness in its evolved state is self-illuminating. We know that. That's what we're on. That's the path we're trying to traverse. So when our soul becomes fully self-realized, we become self-illuminated. So these planets that are there in the spiritual world are also conscious. Therefore, they are self-illuminous. So Prabhupada continues, the word existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all sorts of truth. When you are a seer, then your study is based on what is spirit and what is matter. That is true education. And that is the education that is valuable to human life. All the other education that we have is based on vocation, right? We become engineers, doctors, lawyers, whatever vocation you have. But it's only assisting you to earn a salary. Is it assisting you to understand life? So you may be a doctor, you may be a lawyer, you may be an engineer, But what do you know about life? What have you studied and understood about spirit and matter? Oh, so then you Panditji? So then, Panditji, when you have to face birth, disease, old age, and death, your engineering knowledge is not going to help you there. Your doctorate knowledge is not going to help you there. Your lawyer knowledge is not going to help you there. And if you haven't, then you haven't completed the gift that a human being can experience. Because only a human being can study matter and spirit. So, what school you went to? So indirectly, Prabhupada is saying this is true education. So Prabhupada goes on. This is the beginning of the instruction of the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. So Prabhupada is saying this is the beginning of the instructions. Om Ajnana Timirandasya. And Krishna is removing the ignorance. See, Prabhupada says here at the end. By the influence of ignorance. So it's ignorance. So how do you cure ignorance? So it's ignorance, ajnana. How do you cure ignorance? With vijnana, with realized knowledge. Therefore Krishna says in the 9th chapter, this is the system of science that was only taught to the kings. It was the science of consciousness. Raja Vidya Raja Ghuyam Pavitram Idam Uttama Pratyaksha Vargamam Dharmam Sushukam Kartam Avyayam. This is the king of knowledge. Raja Ghuyam, it's the most secretive. Pavitra Midam Uttama is the most pure because it gives you insight into your true nature, into who you really are. Pratyaksha Vargamam Dharmam. It gives perception of the self through realization. Wow! How does it give perception? Through realization. And Susukam Kartam Avyayam. It is joyfully performed. So all these things that we want to know, we want to experience, we want to know about life, and we want to experience happiness. All of this can be achieved by following this path of Krishna consciousness or the Aryan culture. So Prabhupada says, removal of ignorance involves the re-establishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable. What is the ignorance? You've forgotten your relationship with the spiritual world. You've forgotten your relationship with Krishna. That is the only ignorance. So once the spiritual master, Divya Gyan Hridaya Prakashito, that he from the heart, he reveals the Divya Gyan, the divine knowledge, not this material knowledge, not this material knowledge in this world. Divya Gyan, divine knowledge. Hridaya Prakashito. He's removing the ignorance from your eyes to see your own true spiritual nature. This is the spiritual master. So Prabhupada goes on. And the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the system of understanding this is to know that I am part and parcel of God. I am also a divine being, but I am a subordinate divine being. He is the supreme divine being. Then the relationship is then developed as a servant and as a master. But we are not slave servants. We are serving out of love. We are serving out of gratitude. So Prabhupada goes on, one can understand the nature of the Supreme by thoroughly studying oneself. So what do we call this? Dhira. This is the dhira. You are thoroughly understanding yourself. What is the dhira? Is one who studies the soul, the super soul, nature, matter and spirit. This is the dhira. This is what Prabhupada is talking about. So he goes on. The difference between oneself and the Supreme Being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. The Lord is the supreme whole. Purnamadha, Purnamidam. He is the supreme complete whole. Once we understand this is the relationship, then it's very easy to connect. Aren't we looking for that entity that can always support us? So by nature you can see it's within everyone's heart that they are actually looking for the Supreme Lord directly. They just don't know. They've just been deluded. They've just been illusioned by this material teaching and the material energy. And they don't know anything better. That's why when you hear and come into true spiritual knowledge, it awakens the heart. You feel it, you know it. Nobody has to tell you this is the truth. What this person is speaking is true. Nobody has to tell you that. You just know it from within. This is what I always wanted to know. This is what I always was hankering for. Where could I find such a person who could speak this kind of knowledge? This is Srila Prabhupada. He has given us all this information. He's given us all these books. So Prabhupada goes on here. In the Vedanta Sutra, as well as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. So we see that first verse of Bhagavatam, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadi Yasya Yataha. Janmadi Yasya Yataha. He is the origin of all creation. And even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravatyate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. That I am the origin of all spiritual and material worlds. So Krishna is establishing himself through authentic scripture, revealed scripture, that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada goes on in the purport. Such emanations are experienced by superior and inferior material sequences. So this is a very big topic in science, sequencing material nature. So Prabhupada is talking about this already. He's saying here, superior and inferior material sequences. So I was remembering during Obama's regime, American presidency, that he made a big campaign to sequence the genome, the human genome. So he sequenced the material aspect of it. But have you found the living being? Then who is sequencing the spiritual aspect? This is the Tattvadarshi. Who is sequencing the material aspect? The seers, those who are seekers of the truth. So by studying the DNA of human beings, we have sequenced the human genome through material sequencing. Now the other half needs to be done. We need to sequence the spiritual nature by studying the soul. So Prabhupada concludes here, the living entities belong to the superior nature as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter, although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic. The energetic is accepted as the supreme. So he's saying you are also divine. You also have a divine nature to you. You are also a divine being, but you are a subordinate divine being. You are dependent on the superior being. Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam Ekho Bahunam Jo Vitadadi Kaman. How many times we've chanted this sloka? So this is the point. Both are Nitya, eternal, both are Chaitanas, conscious, but Ekho Bahunam Jo Vitadadi Kaman. One, Ekho, is dependent on the other. And energy or nature is accepted as the subordinate. The living entities, therefore, are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant, or the teacher and the taught. Such clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. So you see, under ignorance you're looking at the world. You want to understand this depth of knowledge? Which school you went to? Which level of education is going to teach you this? This is coming from the Tattvadarshis. They study knowledge, both matter and spirit. You see how deep this is? And to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. That means it's relevant right now. The knowledge of Bhagavad Gita is relevant right now. Prabhupada says here, for all time.